On this week's podcast, I sit down with Brea Brannen, the youth ministry intern, and we discuss some struggles that she's gone through and how mentors have had an impact on that. Brea, I know you pretty well. I've gotten to know you over the last 5 months pretty well. But could you introduce yourself to our listeners so they get an idea of who Brea is, what she does?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Brea Brannen, and I'm an intern here at Encounter Church of Palmyra. I've been the youth intern for like the last 4 months, and then I was the worship intern for 4 months back in my last semester of college, which was in fall of 2020. And I also sing on the worship team here. I've done that for the last 3 years, and I've been on our missions team as our communications person for the last 2 years.
Great. Could you talk about those internships just a little bit? Because a lot of our listeners could potentially have the ability to do something like that. Could you talk about how that's impacted you and in different ways, whether it's the youth ministry internship or the worship one?
Yeah, they both have impacted me so much. They've prepared me for just going out into the world and all the different skills that I've learned. With my worship internship, that was really cool. We released a single, and I had to meet with like a whole bunch of the different ministries within the church to help like create. Well, essentially, I took them in as clients, and I would work on their website for them or any announcements that they needed. Like Brock had me meet with each one of them, so that way I could just figure out what their needs were in terms of like website and social media presence. And then releasing the single was really cool. Noah Altoff, who was on here a few weeks ago, he helped me produce that. He was like, taught me so much through that. We contacted playlisters. We were featured on a blog and a playlist when we released the single, and we had an album cover made, and we were in the works for a music video for a little bit. That ended up not panning out, but that was so cool to do that. And then this internship has been like really cool. I've learned so much more in particular with like what I'm doing with communications. It was so cool getting to be part of rebranding, like creating the new logo, the new apparel. I'm wearing this shirt, yes. And I'm having like a new sign made for our Impact in the Morning. So it's been really cool to see like the ins and outs of how all of those things work, and like just the process of everything has been so cool to learn and figure out and to build all these new connections and skills. Creating, like, helping produce this podcast has been a huge like learning curve for me. Like how much I've learned to work with like all the different softwares, editing it, like making sure it's scheduled. I had like such a moment of panic when I was like finally figured it out, and then you texted me and you're like, so it's only 15 seconds long, can you fix that? And I was like, no, like I thought I finally figured it out. So it has been so cool to figure all of this out like slowly.
Yeah, I know that for me, and I don't know if you felt like this, but for me, I felt like, we were just going to come in, you were going to come in, we are going to do all these things in like 2 minutes, and then we're going to figure out what else to do.
Right.
And that is not how it played out.
Nope.
Starting a podcast was a little more work than I had anticipated, and rebranding is a pretty big deal too.
Yeah,
so.
right.
But I'm excited for what the future holds for the ministry and for you, and I'm glad that it's had an impact on you, and you'll had an impact. Yeah, there we go. The dad jokes start rolling in.
Yep.
But you're contemplating kind of a big move, right? Do
Yep.
you wanna share anything about that?
Yeah, so I am I'm in the process of moving to California. I have been out there a few times. I just absolutely love it. Since the first time that I went out there, I just like, so I had this dream school, right, when I was going to go to college. It was Belmont University in Nashville. I was accepted and everything. And when I went to visit it, like everyone told me when you're in the right place that like you would know it. And I wanted to feel that so bad when I went to Belmont, but I just didn't. But every time I've been to California, like I like know what they mean. Like, so when I first came home, I was just like, my mic is like slowly moving. When I first came home, I was just so missing it, and just so like, I was almost like feeling like depressed because I thought like, well, everybody makes fun of the idea of moving to California. So I was like I can't move to California. That's like across the country. Like my life is here. But it was really persistent and it was on my heart like for a while. And so one morning I was like opening at my job by myself and I asked our cook, because he's from Egypt, and I just asked him, I was like, how did you know when like that it was the right thing to move your whole family like from Egypt? And he said to me, and we really never talked much, so he didn't really know that I was like that I'm work at the church or anything, because he said to me, well, not to get all religious on you, he's like, but when God calls you to something, he opens the doors. And if you have to force the doors open, it's probably not what God is calling you to. And so I thought that that was so interesting. So as it was like persistent on my heart, I started to just pray like, okay, Lord, like, are you keeping this on my heart for a reason? Like, could I move to California? Should I move to California? So over the next few months after that, I just kind of slowly started talking to different mentors about that. I have like two or three, well, two like main mentors, but I slowly was talking to them about just this idea and all these feelings I was having, and each of them reassured me, it's okay. Like, if you want to go to California, it's okay. Like, if you feel that God is like blessing this move. And like they pretty much had said the same thing. If God wants you to go, he's going to make a way for it to work out. Yeah. And he definitely has had such a hand in it, because I at first had the move idea with one of my friends, and that friendship actually ended up like totally falling apart, which was so heartbreaking at the time, but now I know that it was definitely God stepping in and saying, this is not a good person that you should be living with. So that was really hard for me at first, but I was so discouraged too, like, how could I make this work by myself? And then I just felt like God was telling me, like, this plan is not dependent on her. Mm-hmm. So that kind of has been like the whole like motto through this whole thing has been, my plan is not dependent on anyone else, because there's been different things, like my mom has had a really hard time with this move, and so that's kind of driven a bit of a wedge between us. But God has really been helping me work for that. God has been actively trying to help me understand that I need to give her to him, and he will take care of that part, even if I don't understand it. So that's the thing that's really that God has really been working on. Like each time I kind of start to take over the plan, that kind of falls apart, and then I'm like, well, now it won't work, and God's like, let me figure this out. So, and as far as figuring out where in California, that's really cool too, because I was thinking about like San Diego, because I have such a heart for anti-sex trafficking organizations, and so like Los Angeles and San Diego are pretty high on the FBI's like worst case lists. So that's really where I wanted to focus, was like San Diego, like living outside of San Diego. But then so my boyfriend lives out there. He's in the Marines, as you know. But I was out there visiting him, and we were trying to drive somewhere to meet one of our friends, and we ended up in this little town that we totally did not mean to go to. Yeah. And Laguna Beach, and we both were just commenting on how cute this town was. Like, it was so, like, there was art
Dustin
galleries.
Dustin was saying how cute it was.
Okay, Dustin wasn't saying it was cute. He's gonna watch this and be like, yeah, what? But yeah, so well, he was commenting on how cool it was. Like, the architecture was like, it was just so cool. It's such an artsy place. Like, that's really the best way to describe it. And it's right on the coast there too. So then I started thinking, like, well, maybe I should look here. And obviously, I don't really believe in coincidences. So I thought, like, there's obviously like a reason that we might have driven through here. And I really think it was God, like, letting us know, like, look at this area. Like, and then, because also like almost that same weekend, something had happened in San Diego that like really threw my confidence in like the area that I had been looking at, because I've been like researching like crime rates and stuff if I'm going to be living by myself. So I felt like that was just like all happened around the same time. So I just really felt like God was leading me like away from my original idea. So this whole move has just been just God being a work in progress. I keep describing it as like, I feel like I'm playing Candy Lane and I keep moving like one color block. Like, I don't really know how far where I'm going yet, but God just keeps like leading me one block at a time.
That's great. And I can, that feeling of peace that you get when you are like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I can tell you that that is real, and definitely it definitely wasn't part of my plan to come back to Pennsylvania. I grew up here, or about an hour from here, and we looked at churches in Idaho and
Oh, wow.
Boston and some down south where we previously were, and ended up an hour from home. We were not trying to come home at all. And people ask me why I left the beach for Pennsylvania, and I just tell them I like the smell of cow poop. But um,
We all know that's a lie.
yeah, it is certainly a lie. But that feeling of peace that God gives you is certainly real, and it's so hard to describe unless you've experienced it.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited. I'm looking forward to what God does through you out there, and what He teaches you, and where you ultimately end up, because you already have realized, like, this is a step. This isn't necessarily the place where you'll end up.
Right.
It could be. But I love that you're living in such an open-handed way, where the Candyland metaphor is great to just take one step at a time, because that's typically how God reveals things to us and shows us, oh, okay, do this thing, and then we'll see. And as long as we're faithful and obedient, He'll continue to do that. But you mentioned a couple of mentors in that. Could you share a little bit more about your relationship with those mentors, and what those mentors have meant to you over the years, and how they've kind of influenced your faith, how they've influenced your life, those kinds of things?
Yeah, I have two main mentors. The one is Karen. She just moved, but she was very prominent here in the church. She taught several growth groups. And she and I actually, with another girl, did a discipleship triad for 9 months. But previous to that, we had our own mentorship that we did. So I went through a really hard time where I actually had almost ended my life. And God just, I remember praying, like, okay, God, like, if you're real, like, you have to show me. And, well, not you have to show me, you have to save me, because I can't do this. And boy, did He, because I lost, like, all the people in my life that were, like, these toxic people. And I gained all these amazing new people in my life, like Noah and Paige and Brock and Karen, my one mentor, and Yannette, my other mentor. So, how God used them in my life was Karen actually just messaged me on Facebook just because she had seen me, like, playing with her son, and she had never introduced herself to me. And I always say that she came into my life like a storm, because in, like, the best way possible, because I don't know how I ended up like, messaging her on Facebook, planning lunch with her, to, like, being at her dinner table crying about, like, wanting to end my life, and, like, all these things that I was going through and hurting myself. And she just was like, I don't know, like, she had felt God, like, call her to reach out to me or something. But so she, over the next few months, she and I would meet almost on a weekly basis. She met with me, like, I went to partial hospitalization for 4 weeks, so that meant, like, I could come home every night, and then I would meet with her once a week. We went through this amazing book together called The End of Me, and, like, on the book title, like, me is, like, slashed and it becomes, like, Jesus. That's an amazing book. I highly recommend the read. And we went through that together for several months, and that really started me on my journey with God. And then we started the discipleship triad. And then Yannette, I met her around the same time. I had a friend who went to Celebrate Recovery, and they knew some of my struggles, and they were like, I think it's time, like, that you come along with me and check this out. And I was like, I don't need that. Like, that's not for me. Like, which so many people there say that was their attitude. But when I went there, like, it's just such an amazing place, like, so amazing. And Yannette is one of the leaders there. And she comes to this church. So after the service was over, she came and talked to me, and she's like, hey, like, I recognize you from church. Like, you sing with my husband. Like, and so, because I had even come to lead worship at Celebrate Recovery, like, months before this, like, when I was going through all my stuff and nobody knew. So she and I just had the most amazing talk, and she understood, like, all those dark parts of me that I was trying to, like, work through and heal from. And not that, like, Karen didn't. I had, like, different different relationships with both. One helped me like focus more on building a relationship and path with Christ, and the other kind of helped me work through my hard times, work through just those parts of me that I was trying to forgive in myself. Because the hardest thing for me was guilt. But I have learned that God does not condemn; He convicts. And once He convicts, He helps you through it, and He gives grace. And He doesn't keep condemning you, but the world keeps condemning
we do
you.
that to
And
ourselves
yeah,
sometimes,
and
yeah.
we do that to ourselves. So that was like the biggest thing that she helped me through. So now I just meet with them like just every once in a while, or I'll give them a call. Like I'll text them. Like Yannette and I go for hikes a lot. So whenever I'm making a big decision about like something like life altering, like when I quit my one job of like 5 years, I like went to Karen and Yannette to like, okay, what do I do? Like, and they just helped me talk through it on like a godly perspective, but also like a perspective of knowing where I've come from and knowing what I've worked through. So it's been so great. Like even with the move to California, like I know that I'll always have them. Like Karen just moved to another state, and I already asked her if I could call her. So they're really great. I don't need to lean on them quite as much as I used to, but I think that's the beautiful part about mentorship is at first you need them so much, and then you get to a point where like you just need to touch base and get some insight every once in a while.
Well, and I think you go through seasons too.
Oh,
It's
for sure.
and you speaking about that, I have somebody in Michigan that's like that for me. I have somebody in Florida that's like that for me, and somebody in New York that's like that for me, and so it's kind of like I've got these people and they're all over the place, but they're just a phone call away, and there's people that you feel like you haven't seen them in months or even years sometimes, but you call them up and it's like just the last conversation you had. It's like, my goodness, like it was like we were just hanging out. And
Yeah.
so my question about those mentors would be, when you were, I don't know how old you were when those relationships started, but would you say that you were looking for that kind of relationship, or
No.
you just kind of found it?
It just honestly, like God brought it to me. That is just the only answer because, like, just how everything happened in its timing after I had prayed that, and I had had a plan and a day, and God just swept that all away and gave me these amazing people that it just kind of happened. And the with Yannette, like we've never like agreed that I'm like she's my mentor, but she was like my sponsor through that. So some people just give you a look when you say sponsor. So and then they want to know like, oh, what was your issue? Like and while like I'm not ashamed of it, I will
Right.
gladly tell my story. She's just become more of a mentor now than a sponsor because I don't really need that as much in my life
Right.
anymore in this season. But I do still reach out to her when I'm going through those hard times. But also, I'm like thinking like, what was the question? Uh, Karen and I, I'm sorry, wait, what did you ask?
Were you looking for that kind of
No,
relationship?
Karen came into my life like I said, like a storm. Like I wasn't even looking for it. I still don't really know how it happened, but she proposed the idea of like that she wanted to meet with me and that there was this like mentorship that was taking place. I think Steve Mann had kind of started it.
Okay.
And then that's how the discipleship triads came to be. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of what we're trying to do within senior high youth ministry, because I think you can stand on the other side of that now and say, "Wow, this is something I really needed in my life." I think for the most part, everybody needs that,
Yeah.
but not everybody sees that, and
Right.
so we're trying to create environments where we can do that instead of, just come and play some loud games and loud music.
Yeah.
We want to create those relationships, and even somebody that's significantly older than our high schoolers that's able to speak into their lives. I think it's good for a 20-something to be able to relate to them and what they're going through a little bit, but it's also good for somebody in their 50s or 60s to be able to pour into them and come from a place of they've walked through a lot of these things, and potentially even walk through these things with their own kids. And so that's really, really cool about the mentors, and kind of backing up on your move to California. You heard a lot of negativity and then you ran that through the filter of your mentors. And so of the hundreds, I don't know, the tens or the hundreds of people that were telling you California's dumb, don't move to California, you ran it through the filter of your two mentors, and their words had so much more weight.
Yes.
Why would you like how were you able to get to a place, because I could assume that it wouldn't always have been that way.
No.
The louder voices may have gotten the influence, but how did you come to a place where those two women in particular, their opinion, their voice, their influence really mattered to you?
Yeah, so I was always a people pleaser, and always I would, not that I went along with the crowd, but I didn't want to do anything to upset the crowd. So there was a time in my life that all the negative responses would have definitely pushed me away from it, because there was a time they were louder than my own voice in my head. And the thing that's been really hard through this has been how close my mom and I have always been. And so her lack of support over some of with this move and some things that I've done over the last year has been really hard for me, just because I love her and I don't want to disappoint her, and I hate to upset her. But the reason those mentors' voices are louder than the rest is because of the bias that they don't have. They don't have a bias towards there's no selfishness in their bias. When I'm coming to them with an issue, they are hearing okay, I need solid biblical godly advice about this, not that I need somebody else's opinion. So I think the reason theirs is so much more important to me is because when they know that I need God breathed advice, they don't state their opinion on it until after the end of the conversation. They'll let me know their concerns or whatever. But everything is always just biblical based. Just that they hear my heart, and they hear the motivations behind it. They listen to what I'm really saying, and if it's coming from God, or if it's coming from my heart, if it's coming from a place that they're concerned about, they'll voice it to me. That's why I appreciate about them, because they'll be blunt, but it's in a loving way to keep me from myself, essentially. So all those other opinions don't really matter as much, because they're those people's opinions, and they're based on their life experiences, and they're based on not truly hearing me out from a perspective that's of God. But those mentors, they hear me out on where I'm at in my life, and where I'm at in my relationship with God, and where I'm at with support systems. And they're okay, if you feel like God is opening these doors, I'm with you. So they're very, I guess because they're biased in they're biblically biased, you could say. They're not selfishly biased. They're not just trying to keep me here, or trying to make me feel dumb, or they're not even looking at what California is essentially as a whole. Just looking at, okay, well, if this is what you're feeling called to, let's discuss that.
Yeah, that's really good.
Turn on the lights. Woo!
You got lots of editing to do.
That's okay.
Yeah, so I'm kind of thinking of a story in my own mind that of a kind of similar situation. At my last church, it was completely one of the dumbest things ever. It was a bookshelf, and one of the people on staff had asked me if they could have the bookshelf, and they would buy another one to replace it because they had the matching set or whatever. I go on a week's trip, a week away to student camp, and I come back to my office, and all my books are on the floor, and I'm super upset about it. But what had happened was I actually maxed out the credit cards. So I'm sure they intended to buy me a bookcase, but I maxed out the credit cards, so nobody in the no one in the church could buy anything for that week, because our vans cost so much to rent.
Oh no!
And then so I get back, and I'm frustrated, and there were some other things, and I remember calling calling my mentor. This is the one in Florida, and he's a senior pastor now. He used to be my youth pastor, but I call him and I tell him what's going on, and I basically tell him I'm done. I want to quit. I can't do this anymore. And instead of agreeing with me, instead of you have a right to be mad kind of thing, he basically said, you can quit if you want, but you have a heart problem. And coming from him, there aren't too many people that can tell me that,
Yep.
but he's one of them. And when he told me that, it was kind of like a punch to the gut. And I remember later on that day, I got an email recommending a book, Enemies of the Heart by Andy Stanley. I didn't think like you. I didn't think that was just a coincidence. And I read that like cover to cover in like 4 hours. And, went to Panera, and I was just like, concordance, everything that said heart in it and what the Bible said about heart, and just kind of seeing what God was going to teach me. And I had the opposite interaction at that time with a Christian counselor. He kind of tried to even sway me to thinking less that I had a heart problem and more that the bookshelf was a huge issue.
Oh.
And so like to have someone that I trusted in my life that could say, hey, you're being an idiot right now.
Yeah.
Like, it's super important, and I think that everyone needs it, and so that's I'm glad that has been your process, because I think if your process was, well, I'm just going to move to California, here's a place I can afford, and here's a job I can get, and fill in the blanks, we'll do the rest later. I think that's not necessarily what God's calling you to do, but He wants us to seek that wisdom, seek that advice. So I'm glad you're able to do that. What would you say to someone, think back to 16, 17-year-old Brea, not all that long ago, but a little bit ago. But think back to 16, 17-year-old Brea, and maybe there's another young woman or young man that's having similar feelings, having similar thoughts. What would you say to them? What would your advice be to someone that's walking through something difficult like you went through?
Well, I know like not everyone can find a mentor that easily. I mean, I didn't even like find mine. They just happened upon me. But I do know that when you ask God to help you through something that you can't handle, when you surrender yourself and acknowledge like, Lord, I cannot do this. Like, I need you to step in for me. He will. Like, he absolutely will. And it will not at all look like what you think it needs to look like. I would have, like, in the moment when because I was around, I think I was around, like, I was 19 when that was, like, the worst year, I'd say, that God had to save me from. Because I had, like, that time and day set that I wasn't going to live anymore. And when I had prayed that prayer, like, Lord, if you're real, you need to save me because I can't do it. And then our house flooded. Our house got flooded, and it was a disaster. The carpets were ruined. Like, the furnace was ruined. Like, it would cost my mom so much money, and I've never seen, like, my mom had just went through such a hard time with that. And so it was almost that I just kind of, like, not that I forgot about the plan, but, like, there's just life was happening, and I had to be there for my mom, and you know what I mean? Like, just like I couldn't make her life worse in that moment was kind of like what I was thinking. So I was like, okay, I'm going to have to reset this plan for like a month from now or whatever. And then I had another series of events that led me to finally telling my mom that I was struggling with self-harm again. And she, along with like Karen, had really pushed me towards like finding a therapist, actually, because it was in that time then that Karen had messaged me, and I went over to her house, and I just suddenly ended. Like I said, I really don't know how it happened that I was there for lunch, and just somehow like everything just came pouring out, and then I finally did get to go to a therapist, and she like recommended like the program for the partial hospitalization. And so it just is really being in a posture of willing to let God help you and willing to be part of a plan that isn't what you think it needs to be, because I would have thought that I needed somebody to step in like directly. But at first I lost a bunch of friends and I thought like that life was getting worse. And I'm like, how is this God helping me? And because I just felt so alone and I lost everybody. But then one by one, I started to gain these new people, and I started to realize that like I needed to lose those other people in my life, because those toxic friendships were what were putting me like closer to tragedy. And so I really needed to let the Lord work in his way. And I didn't even realize that I was doing that. It just was all like just happened so fast. It all happened over the course of about like a month and a half that all those things happened. So you will feel alone for a little while. Like if you ask God to work in your life, he may need to remove people. He may need to get you by yourself, but that's like when he really shows up. And like I said, the plan will never look like what you think it's going to. But just asking God to give you someone in your life, like he so often does. There have been other times that I have just prayed that someone could just talk to me about something. And there was a time that I didn't even like pray for this, but I was really struggling with something in my personal life, and I was singing on the worship team, and this woman came up to me at the end of the service, and she's like, "Look, I'm just visiting in the area. I probably won't be back just because I'm just here for vacation or whatever." She's like, "But the Lord has really stirred my spirit to pray for you." And I didn't even like know this woman, and she prayed for me. And not only did she pray for me, but she prayed so specifically for my situation that I was just, and she didn't know any of it. And it just moved me to tears. And I just know like when you put yourself in that posture of surrender to God and admitting that you can't do it and you need help, like he will absolutely show up. Just be prepared for it to not look like what you think it should.
Right. And your willingness to do those things was also a big deal, I think, too. Like the woman comes up and asks you to pray, I want to pray for you, but well, I'm on the worship team. You don't, I'm good. That might be some of our tendency, or the, getting invited to lunch at Karen's house. Could have very easily been, why am I going to go to lunch at this lady's house? Like, why would I do that? And trying to realize like, okay, I've prayed for these things, and here's God's answer, and being willing to say yes, even though it might look different. And so I think that's pretty important. But I have the same question, only a little different. Let's like spin it on its head with Karen and Yannette. And I know Yannette, and I know she's great, but I do not know Karen. And but like let's say there's an older person, and when I say older, it can mean anybody that's older than young adult age. Like it really doesn't make a difference. I think that we all should be pouring into to somebody younger than us. But when maybe there's someone like that watching this podcast, it's like, well, I don't really struggle with any of these things, or maybe they do, or maybe they have, but they're like, I feel like this tug to get involved in a younger person's life, but maybe they think they're not cool enough, or they don't wear the right clothes, or they don't say the right things, they don't listen to the right music, or those kinds of things. What would your advice be to that person?
That you never know how God's going to use you. There have been so many situations that I've entered into, especially this internship with the youth, like that I'm worried I'm going to be too lame, like trying to start like some of the challenges or whatever. But you just never know how God is going to work in you. So I stay honest, and I just live unapologetically. Like if they want to know that I struggled in my past, like I'll let them know. Like I'm not perfect. Like I have been through some struggles, and I'm never going to judge you for going through those struggles, and neither does God. And God just wants to help you before you even get to those struggles. So I would really just say that, these kids will hear you like over and over again, and they may like roll their eyes, but they're listening. Like they really are. I know that there's like a leader in the youth group who they just, whenever they have small groups, like they seem like they're always just having fun, like playing video games, ordering pizza, like being ridiculous. But there was a time when I was walking around taking pictures, and I was like, oh, I can just walk in this group, like, because they're never doing anything serious. I can just walk in here. And I walked in, and they were actually like all like so focused on what he was saying, and it was like a deep moment. And he was like, Brea, could you actually give us like a moment? And I would like, that's what it's all about. Like, even if you're meeting with them every week and you think that you have made no progress with them and you have like made no difference in their life, that's not true, because you're setting an example and you're showing them, like, especially by being honest, like, you're showing them that they can trust you, that you are not going to give them cookie cutter advice that you've heard 10,000 times at like school assemblies. Like, you're being honest and real about that life is hard and sometimes you mess up, and it's not the end of the world, and you can always come back to God. And they really see, when they see that like lived out, especially by someone being honest about their story, but then also so honest about how God has redeemed them and changed them, it just builds like this curiosity, and that they may never explore, or they may reach out to you months later. So there's just always, you never know how God is using you and your life and your story and your lameness, if you think it's lame. You never know how God is like putting that in their heads and working that out in their thoughts.
Yeah, I agree totally. I think that more often than not, young people will respect those older people, even if it doesn't look like it. They'll hear them out, and I mean, in that case of that small group leader you're sharing about, I mean that's 2 years, over 2 years of him building relationship with those guys to earn that, almost like Karen and Yannette did with you, where they have this relationship with you where they can at that point, okay, when we get serious, when he gets serious, I know I'm gonna listen in, because he's taking the time to have fun with us and to goof off with us and to leave the church and go order pizza when we're not supposed to. He's taking the time to do that with us. Right. So now we're going to pay attention and we're going to listen, and we're going to hear what he has to say. I love that. And I hope that all of my youth leaders watch this and hear that, because it's so true.
Yeah.
There are kids that I had mentored and served over 10 years ago, and who have reached out to me like now and have said, hey, thank you for doing what you did back then. And I had no idea that I even made a difference, or they even heard me one time. But that's the reality is they listen. So, Brea, my last question is, with you going to California, it might be a little harder to keep in contact with you, but if our audience, if they want to get in contact with you, what would be the best way to do that?
I would say, like you said with the move, I don't know like what all will be changing, but my Instagram is always open, and my email, I can like include that in the description.
We'll put it in the description. Yeah. What's the Instagram? Because
my Instagram is just my name, Brea Brannen. It's BreaBrannen.
There we go.
And it's so funny saying like I'll add this in the description. It's so funny being a part of a podcast, because I know I'm gonna like edit it later and like schedule it, and that's so funny.
And I'm sad to see Brea go, because that means that someone else has to do all those things, and I don't know what I'm doing, as evidenced by us trying to set up for today. But
I hope somebody like watching like feels encouraged to be part of this ministry, this internship, because even like doing social media or whatever, like I started this as just doing like trying to increase like stuff on the Instagram, and like we had these other projects, but like that was like my main focus to start. And I didn't anticipate like building the relationships that I did with several of the kids. And like I love when they come. Like there's certain ones that they're upset when I was not here or when I was late, and so I just love seeing how God has like worked in my heart through this internship. Like it was so much more than just developing skills. It was developing like a love for this part of the ministry. Not that I didn't like love kids or expect to love them. I just, there's so many of them, and I was like, I'm never going to learn all their names, and I'm never going to get to like know any of these. I'm just the girl walking around taking pictures. Like, but it's been really cool to get to know them and to know their stories, and just to, like, when they get here, to ask them how things are going, like, to hear how their stories are just, it's so cool to have been a part of that.
Yeah. Thank you, Brea. I appreciate your service to the ministry and being on the podcast. That it was great conversation, and I hope that someone out there in the audience, is encouraged by this and either seeks out that kind of mentorship relationship or, has the ability to chase their dreams, go move to California despite the negative voices coming in, because they have built that relationship with those mentors and they're able to speak positively in their life. So thank you, Brea, and best of luck to you out in California. We'll definitely keep in touch.
Thank you.